welcome to this brand new episode of the Silmarillion Film Project, starting further behind and later than usual.
Hooray!
Yeah, that's a recipe for success for us.
Absolutely. That's how we roll.
We won't get into why.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll just say that one of our key panelists, Corey Olsen, Tolkien professor, might have been a little behind on his homework.
It might possibly have been behind my homework. Indeed.
Yeah. But it's good homework because we have a script to discuss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Delivered
full
to us
script.
by our showrunners, Marie and Nick, who are here with us, and I, of course, am Dave. But we're covering like all the bases. We've got elves. We've got the humans, of course, and then we have some dwarves. So this is going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to it. And a lot of discontent.
Indeed. Simmering discontent all over the place. Well, almost all over the place. There's at least one place where there is not any simmering discontent. And we'll see some of that too. But yeah, we get more Haleth. We get to introduce one of the core characters of the entire season, who we've seen, but we get Andreth, who is really at the heart of the human story, emerging here in the second half of the season because of human ages and stuff. And of course, she's going to be a major focal point through the whole second half of the season, which is, of course, eventually going to be focusing on her star-crossed romance, followed by philosophical discussions as we get to one of the elements of, one of the kind of the lesser-known elements of Tolkien, or sort of pieces of writing by Tolkien, but just one of my very favorites, the Athrabeth of Finrod and Andreth, which is just spectacular, and I'm so looking forward to our Athrabeth episode. Is that 10? The Athrabeth episode, essentially, the debate between them?
That'll be 11.
11. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. The Athrabeth and then Doom Falls, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Cool.
The romance will be episode 9.
What Doom? Whatever could you mean?
What could possibly happen? Right? Yeah. Sorry, I just suddenly crossed my mind, like, have we ended every season with some kind of like military stroke or disaster? Pretty close, right? I mean, there was, Maedhros's capture. The war to begin all wars, right?
And then season 2 was the Darkening of Valinor.
The Darkening of Valinor, right?
Season 3, capture of Maedhros, but really the arrival of Fingolfin. So that wasn't necessarily a military thing. And
the
then
unfriendship of Fingolfin and Morgoth.
Right. And then, of course, we had Glaurung last time. So, yeah, we have tended to end with not all disasters by any stretch, but certainly...
I mean, that's kind of how it's done.
Yeah, I know. Right. We don't want to end with a quiet, dull episode. Nobody really wants that. But of course, we have so much more scope in terms of ending each season with crushing tragedy moving forward that, we'll really be able to take our pick, I think, which is pretty cool. Exactly, Brian. We did, in fact, get to end with a literal cliffhanger in season 3, so that was really good. Even though you're not supposed to do that, I guess, at the end of it, or, whatever. But we did, yeah. But before we get any further in digressions and talking about what we're talking about, brief announcements. Just a reminder about Mythmoot 8 coming up June 24th, 27th. Still time to sign up. It's going to be a fully hybrid event. So we're going to be live in Leesburg, Virginia, and you can also join us online. Been having a lot of fun planning the ways that we're trying to be really as unilaterally inclusive as possible as we can be there. This is not going to be one of those like, we're just doing a live event and there'll be a camera in the corner and you can be like, wait, what's happening there? And I can't hear it. We're going to try to be a little bit more immersive than that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We also have our Signum clubs going on. Those are our extracurricular programs for kids, book clubs, creative writing clubs, and language clubs. Really, really fun stuff. And we definitely want to invite you to our Sim Film forums. They're at forums.signumuniversity.org. We have several things that are going on now. First, we're coming on to the final script discussion. You guys are up to episode 13, so that is excellent work. So on Sunday, June 6th at 7:30 p.m. that will be happening. And of course, casting nominations for you can see, go to our forums, you can see all of the roles that are open for casting. Make some suggestions there. We're going to close the casting soon, about a week and a half at the end of May. On May 31st, we will close casting nominations, and then we'll be doing voting after that. So stay tuned for that, but definitely want to invite folks to participate there. Yeah, it would be really cool to have at least 3 nominees per role, Stephen. So that would be really great.
Please help us with casting. We have no idea.
yeah, I certainly don't. This is one of the things where I'm always learning most because I'm pretty clueless when it comes to this stuff. But it's always a fun discussion. All right. Speaking of fun discussions, though, let's get back to Eöl, Maeglin, and Aredhel. So this is the tail end of episode 7. Well, not the end of the episode, but the end of our discussion of the episode. Help me to remember. I could try to conceal that it's me who needs help and be like, let's help our viewers recall. But I totally am the one who needs reminding. So what was remind me of the A and B plots of episode 7. This was the establishment of things. This was after the arrival of folks in Brethil, right?
Yeah.
So the focus of episode 7 is the Council in Estalad.
The Council of Estalad, right? Of course, yeah, I remember that.
So this is Hodor becoming the leader of his people, and Sauron having this fake Amlach plot going on throughout that. So that's what we discussed last time, is the Hodor stuff and the Sauron stuff, including Amlach. And what ties into that very tangentially is that Amlach is lost in the woods of Nan Elmoth, and that's why he's not at the council.
Right,
which ties
yes.
into this story.
Okay, and so that's what actually connects us through so that we can continue the Maeglin, Aredhel, and Eöl plotline without an utter disjunction from the... Especially since it is, like, next door, right? The Council of Estalad is happening right next door in Nan Elmoth, so it does make sense to tie them in some sense. In fact, it's even kind of more interesting, right? I mean, on one level, what's happening now, right, is something... What's happening now, like, just down the road, right, from where they are in Nan Elmoth, is something which would have been intensely interesting to Aredhel, right, based on what we know, based on what we've seen from her and her storyline and her personality. You know, she was all about trying to make sure that, you know, all of, you know, the strength that could be mustered could be brought together. You know, it's interesting to kind of imagine if Aredhel had still been at liberty this whole time, you know, when, you know, she never really got a chance to interact with humans. She was all about, like, you know, let's, you know, sort of seizing the opportunity to create new allies, to strengthen the position of the Noldor in their war against Morgoth. And here, since she came out, you know, the humans arrive in Beleriand and all of these things are happening. And yet there she is right in the middle of it, like right near the very epicenter of these discussions. And she's not even like fully aware of what's happening. Right. And that I think is a really interesting irony. Right. I think that's a really powerful way to kind of draw attention to her helplessness, right, to her imprisonment. And you know, the extent to which she's being shut away. It's like, it's worse that it's so close, right? It's not like, I mean, it would be one thing if she were like sequestered in a tower somewhere in a distant corner of the continent, right? I mean, that would create a sense of isolation and loneliness, but the sense of isolation is even in some ways more intense, given that she is isolated and shut away from things although she's so very close and doesn't even realize it. So I kind of like that irony about bringing this story in contact with the human story at Estelad there. Okay, so tell me about let's kind of, one of the challenges of the Eöl and Aredhel story is how we develop their relationship, right? How we show things changing. Because on the one hand, we wanted to have, we wanted this to be a more nuanced story, right? We wanted to develop the characters, both of Aredhel and Eöl, more, and give their story some time and make it a little bit more complicated than just like a rape and imprisonment story simply taken, right? But of course, one of the big challenges there is that we haven't had that much screen time for their relationship. So we've had to kind of come in and give snapshots, right? Essentially of the development of their relationship. So let's just kind of refresh where we are in that. The last time we met them before this was that scene when we were overhearing something that Aredhel didn't understand, right? When we saw that was the first time we saw that kind of division. Where was Aredhel herself in her perspective at that point?
Well, up until that point, like, this is the episode in which we kind of start to break the trust between Aredhel and Eöl.
Right. She's still deceived. Even the last time we saw her, she's still not yet really realizing sort of Eöl's, I hate saying true nature. That's like way too simplistic a phrase. Like, that's not, but that she still is deceived in him, basically, last time.
Right. In this episode, we wanted to, like I said, break that trust.
Right.
One of the difficulties that we had was how to do that, right? Like, what can he do there in Nan Elmoth that's going to break that trust? Now, she could ask to leave and he could tell her no, but that's not super interesting. Like, that's just, that's a scene, maybe.
Right.
And we could have done it that way. But one thing that I've been realizing over, actually kind of over the past few weeks, is how much the Eöl and Aredhel plotline stands out in this season. And part of that is in trying to maintain the surprise for for both Eöl and the viewer, like in trying to maintain the illusion that Eöl can be brought over to the light, right?
Right.
We didn't really spend a lot of time with him before now. We kept saying, "Oh, well, we'll have to include him in the next season. We'll have to include him in the next season."
Yeah, we kept
over the
pushing
past
him
two
off.
seasons, and that didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So now we're having to make this story arc happen pretty quickly, and in ways that don't always line up with the tension of the episodes in which the events fall, right? And so in this one, we had a major difficulty because we needed to make sure that she lost her trust, that he lost her trust.
Right.
But
Yes.
they can't go anywhere or really do anything. And we had talked about having her witness him doing to someone else what he did to her when she first showed up.
Right.
But now we have to introduce random people to show up in Nan Elmoth, and we don't really care about them. But then we realized, oh, wait a minute, we have people moving all around, and we have Amok that we have to get out of the way.
Right. We've got to get rid of him somewhere. So,
we have this huge major problem because anything that we could do, that Sauron would do to get Amok out of the way, none of it's better than killing him.
Nothing.
Or putting the spell of not quite bottomless dread on him.
Right.
Either of those two options are better than anything that Sauron's going to do to detain him.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense why he would do that, right? And sure, he could just randomly be running late, but that's not It's not good TV, right? Like, that's not entertaining.
Right.
That's just a thing that happens, and it just looks like we just made that up just to make the plot work.
Well, and not to mention the fact that it makes Sauron look more incompetent, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yep.
that he's, because, you know, as far as he knows, Amlach could come stumbling in at any minute, being like, "Sorry guys, I'm late," and run into himself, right? So Sauron needs to have things a little more in hand than that, you'd think.
Right. Right.
Yeah, agreed.
And stalling Amlach till Amlach's escape until the very end. Now, of course, Sauron doesn't know that Aredhel's in there and is going to stop Eöl from ensorceling these guys forever. You know, so it's for all he knew, those guys were just going to starve to death in Nan Elmoth and never be seen again.
Right.
Which is what happens when you wander into a fairy forest at night.
Right.
Right. So this gave a plausible reason why he expected this to work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And while also giving Eöl something to do that's evil and creepy that Aredhel can catch him doing.
Yeah, and you know, this actually leads me to, so one of the things we were discussing last time was you know, about like how they get in there and Thuringwethel's role and stuff, and in the end we were leaning towards having her basically planning to kill them or working on killing some of them, and having Amlach and at least one other person escape, right? And the more I think of it now, when we were talking about that last time, I was thinking primarily about Sauron and Thuringwethel and you know, how that question kind of impacts them and their depiction. But I'm also realizing that it has a really positive it has a really good effect on the Eöl storyline as well, right? Because the situation that we're creating is that, you know, I can't help but think of that phrase like, you know, though they are fleeing from Morgoth, hate pursued, right? Which Amlach is, right? Here's Amlach barely surviving, escaping to the very dubious safety of, you know, but like, you know, he's just exited, pursued by like Bat Ninja, right? And, but now he's achieved safety. So, I mean, he's like literally being chased by the servants of Morgoth. And instead of finding, you know, help, an ally, you know, some kind of, we see him instead be ensnared by Eöl, and the kind of complexity of that, right? He's not an ally of Sauron. Like he's working for Sauron and taking his orders. He's independent, and yet we can see the sort of, it's really uncomfortable, right? I mean, we know, and we can even see like how, you know, Amlach and Amlach's disappearance, how the holding of Amlach by Eöl is like basically serving the purposes of Sauron, right? Even though he doesn't know that.
Sauron's use of non-aligned but clearly evil individuals has a long history. He does it with Shelob. He tries to do it with Smaug. He's clearly got something like that going on with the Balrog. Like there's
right.
situations where Sauron does this exact sort of thing,
right?
You know, even Saruman seems to have some connection with Caradhras, and it, you know, and hinders the Fellowship in that way.
Right.
I mean, obviously, it's not to the same extent that it is in the films, where it literally is Saruman that's doing it, but.
Right. I think I might have laughed harder in that moment the first time I saw the Fellowship of the Ring than anywhere else I laughed. But, you know, when Gandalf says, "It's Saruman," I just cracked up. Oh, man, that was so funny. But anyway, agreed. And, of course, you know, we see... we know that he kind of uses Shelob in this way, right, in the in the books, and of course, you know, we sort of played on that by having him use Shelob and all of her brothers and sisters, right, you know, in a similar kind of way. Back in, was that 3? Was that season 3? That was season 3, right?
Season 3.
Yeah.
The girl.
And of course I love that parallel, right? That is like, yes, he has used other like creepy evil giant spiders before, and Eöl is kind of like that, right? You know, and his the kind of parallels between Nun Elmoth and Shelob's lair, right? You know, there are parallels to be drawn, you know, in some ways. You know, and again, even with the whole like you know, sending a prisoner to his cat, you know, again, it's almost like that, right? Again, it's not exactly, it's not a precise parallel, but Nick, I agree that pattern is clear. You know, he does that. He's totally willing to either directly manipulate or simply take advantage of, you know, the actions of other creatures that he knows he can count on. And he's good at that. It makes me think of the thing that you know, Gandalf says in the Council of Elrond when he's talking about how Sauron will be put out of reckoning if they seek to destroy the ring, because in doing so, they're acting in a way that Sauron just cannot understand, right? Because the only measure that he knows is desire, the desire for power. Well, Sauron is really good, though, at taking the measure of other people whose only measure is desire, right? Nick, as you said, like, you know, evil creatures, right? So he's got Smaug pegged, he's got the Balrog pegged, he's got Shelob pegged. Like, he doesn't have to hire them, right? He doesn't have to form an alliance with them. He knows how they operate, and he knows that he can count and he can predict their actions, and therefore, you know, can act on the premise, you know, of their, you know, kind of indirect or even unacknowledged cooperation, right? So anyway, but bringing that parallel into Eöl is really interesting. I mean, that's a really interesting way to kind of frame this moment in the story of Eöl and Aredhel, right? Because again, it's only been really hinted to the viewers that Eöl is bad news, right? I mean, even the viewer has more data than Aredhel, right? How much more data? How much? I'm forget the part that I'm forgetting now is the very, very first scene, their meeting scene. How creepy was that from the perspective of the viewers?
Only to some extent. Certainly she had just gone through a scary forest and he's at the other end waiting for her, kind of thing. So it's not the nicest of introductions, but it's ambiguous enough that they could be like, all this buildup of, you've heard he's a scary guy, but actually he's fine, is a conclusion the viewer is invited to reach at that point. So the viewer is invited to trust him, give him the benefit of the doubt when they see him in this season.
Dark, kind of potentially creepy looking, but probably misunderstood, right? Right.
Like all villains.
Right.
Yeah, you know, like, exactly. They just,
as long as the actor is good looking enough.
Right. Right, exactly. And he is one of our castings this season, isn't he?
But we already have Eöl.
Oh, we
was
did
in season 1. He was at that
of course.
debate.
Of course, I forgot. Right. He was like our spokesman of Ari back in the Council of Cuivianen. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But we are going to be casting Maeglin this season.
Yeah, that's a really important casting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So he was like potentially creepy, but probably misunderstood. And then we got all that the viewers saw. So we did have that moment where the viewers saw that he's lying and hiding things from Aredhel, right? That he is deceiving Aredhel on some level and to some extent, right? That was the kind of peak that we got in their last appearance. But as I recall, even that wasn't like a complete, I mean, it's not like he was having an off-camera villain moment or something like that. It was just showing that he's not forthcoming with her and that he's keeping things from her, right?
Right, so that's in episode 4. So that's they've already met, they've had their romance, they're going on a journey, and Aredhel thinks they're doing their diplomatic thing, and he stops it.
Right.
But it's only one short thing that he does, so the question is, what was his motivation? Why did he stop her? And that's not really answered. So the viewer could make up excuses for him.
Right.
Or say that it was just this one particular case or something. So there is still room to wonder what he's doing, although that's a pretty serious red flag that he deceived her and thwarted her.
But he does convince her that he has good intentions and was acting, in her in best interests, right? And could conceivably convince, viewers or allow viewers to wonder. Okay, so what's then the stage that we get to during the time off stage between then and now? How has Aredhel's perspective changed? Are we trying to establish something new with her, like as far as how she acts towards Eöl? Do we see distrust from the beginning, or a tendency towards distrust, or are we showing like the moment of the breaking entirely, where she's going to be shocked, taken aback, and kind of traumatized?
So throughout the episode, she doesn't find what he's doing until Act 3, right? But she does notice that Eöl seems to be trying to pull her son away from her, in a way, and sometimes, like when he only seems to be really showing him a lot of attention to get him away from her, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like, so she's getting like some vibes that he's very possessive over their son,
right?
And she herself isn't getting a lot of attention from her husband,
right?
That basically their relationship has kind of shifted since their sojourn out in East Beleriand and the birth of their son.
Right.
Because now he has something else. Something that is going to be more pliable and do the things that he wants more readily.
But that sense of competition, which is rooted in his Eöl's possessiveness, right, is going to be the main thing that we're going to see. But really, to this point, the only thing that's really kind of tainting their relationship yet, right? She doesn't...
that she's aware of,
That she's aware of, right, exactly. Exactly, yeah.
She hasn't gone anywhere in 10 years, so she might be feeling a little bit cooped up. I mean, this is Aredhel.
Right.
But they have a young child, and the expectation that she would stay home and care for this young child, she might feel that it's that expectation that she's fighting against, not Eöl. So as soon as the child grows up, that would go away. Right, this is a temporary situation. So at the beginning of this episode, she views their conflict and her unhappiness as a temporary thing that she's working through.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Perceiving that Eöl has more sinister motivations, and therefore this isn't going to just resolve itself with time. Right.
Okay. So first of all, what does Eöl do with hang on a second, wait, just so I can envision this. Maeglin is, how old does he look? He's 10, so he's going to be like 3-year-old-ish?
So yeah. I think we have him appearing to be around 7-ish. Younger
than that? Okay. So kindergarten?
Because he's working the bellows for his father, so it can't be too young.
Oh, he could do that at the age of 6 or 7,
Yeah.
Jumping up and hanging from the top bellow,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Right, I'm just trying to picture, and so we're not yet in this episode. We're not really. Maeglin doesn't really have much in the way of agency, right? Yeah. At all in this. He's just kind of the clueless pawn in this one-sided kind of tug of war between his parents. Mm-hmm. One-sided because I'm assuming that Aredhel is much more gracious than Eöl in sort of sharing his, his time, right? Okay, so now, so let's go. So now here comes, what's his name? Amlach, right? Hate pursued. What is Eöl's standard thing? His normal thing is going to be to, like, put them, like, ensorcel them, put them in a kind of stasis, and what? File them away? Like, what's his plan? What does he do? Experiment with them? What exactly is Eöl's plan?
He has them wandering bewildered until they just die. That is essentially my understanding of what's happening, is that they wind up going in circles and, the standard fairy forest stuff, right?
Sure, sure.
I swear, we just passed this tree 15 seconds ago. The camera is in one spot, right? And they walk past the camera, and then a few seconds later, they come right back into camera from the direction they couldn't possibly have just come from, but too quickly to have actually walked in a circle, right?
Right. Okay.
It's not a real circle. It's like a freaky circle.
Right. Okay.
And the trees are grabbing at them,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
right.
Yeah, he
Creepy
seems
music.
like the kind that he would trap them and then forget about them. Just leave them to their fate.
Yes. Okay. And then, do we have an Eöl musical theme happening? I mean, there's got to be creepy music, appropriate creepy music playing here.
Yeah, the Nan Elmoth theme is probably very heavily Eöl's theme, right?
Right.
But should be tangentially related to Melion's theme. Which
I
is
was
also
thinking the same thing.
Lethean's theme, right?
Yes, I was thinking exactly that like when they're wandering around bewildered in the forest, there should be a recollection of the Girdle of Melion, right?
Mm-hmm.
But twisted, creepier.
Well, Phil's here, so you can ask him what the situation is.
Right. Just, making work for you, Phil. Yeah, that's I like to throw out suggestions that are probably wildly implausible.
No big deal. Every piece of music in the show should be at least somewhat related to every other piece of music in the show.
Right?
How could that be that hard?
Exactly.
I don't understand.
It seems pretty simple conceptually. Okay. All right. So that works. How does she discover this, and what exactly is her response? So she comes across the men?
No. So the way Eöl controls everything is magical device at his home base, and so he has to go there to set this all in motion. And presumably there's like a basin of water that you can see what's going on, kind of thing, and it reflects the image. So if she walks into that space, she would see these people wandering in the forest, trapped in his spellwork.
Okay.
And it's the same place where Thingol and Melion met. So it's like it's the heart of Nan Elmoth. So it's a place that we're relatively familiar with also.
That would be a really fun set design moment, wouldn't it, to have the glade in which Thingol and Melion meet, right? But it's got to have like some salient features so we can recognize it later on as definitely the same place, but really different, right, in its overall feel. And I'm imagining Eöl having like, built his whole kind of like house around it, right? So that it's, maybe. Is it still outdoors? Is it like maybe it's like an inner courtyard, right? That he's literally built his house around, but it's his little sanctum on the inside and.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's probably much bigger on the inside than the outside also. So,
Probably, yeah.
But that's also where Eöl was when Aredhel came and found him. So she's gonna make these connections herself pretty quickly.
Right. Not only like, hey, you're torturing these humans, but is this what you did to me? Like, is this why I experienced what I experienced when I came in? Yes, and I like the link there to not only how. One of the things that I really like about this is that it's not only like the reveal of his, true creepy nature, but it also relates directly to the question of her not being able to leave, right? Because she sees how his power holds the boundaries of Nan Elmoth.
However, she's not trapped by this ensorcelment.
Right.
It's not Nan Elmoth that is keeping her there.
Right.
She has a son whom she loves and would never leave with this guy that she thinks is creepy.
Right.
So she could only leave Nan Elmoth if she's going to take Maeglin with her. And Maeglin is a very young child. Maeglin's father's not going to let him out of there. So she's trapped not by sorcery or by him saying, you're not allowed to leave, but by Maeglin. Like, that's how she's chained there. And she knows that by the end of the episode. She knows she's just as trapped as Amlach was, but not by magic.
Right. Yeah, no, I like it. I'm picturing, by the way, there totally is a pool in the middle, pool of water in the middle of it. Not like, I think not necessarily a basin, just like actually a pool of water in the ground, right? Because I'm imagining when Thingol comes into this glade in the first place, right? There's Melian, and she's probably looking in the pool, right? We're seeing like the reflection of the stars in the pool that she's looking at, right? And he comes up to her and like, we can see their reflections in the pool, right, with the stars behind them and everything. And that would be sort of the moment that's frozen, I would think, right? Probably there, right? So the really cool thing is that the set echoes create those parallels, right? Where she comes in and there he is next to the pool looking down into the pool, except instead of the stars of Varda, what is being revealed are like, the torments of Amlach as Eöl is cheerfully torturing him to death. But Aredhel approaches him, again, like from the same direction, that Thingol came in and approached Melian. Which, of course, again, this also, again, links back to the Melian Eöl kind of anti-parallel there, right?
Well, also. And just as Nan Elmoth is the proto-Doriath, this glade itself and this pool are a prototypical version of Melian's grotto, which is like the very center of the girdle in Menegroth. Melian's grotto where she ensorcelled Galadriel. Right, back in season 4, yes, I think it is
4. Yeah,
and that is itself a prototypical version of Galadriel's mirror, right? The Galadriel's mirror scene in Lord of the Rings, and so there's this lineage that comes all the way down from this glade in Nan Elmoth all the way down into Lothlorien in Lord of the Rings.
Right. So yes, Frodo and Sam approaching Galadriel in the glade there in Lothlorien. It should recall all of these moments in some really fun ways. I'm loving, by the way, not only the idea of overlaying not Galadriel, not just with the obvious Melian parallels, which are so clearly established, right? But to also overlay it with like a hint of Eöl, to overlay the Fellowship's Lothlorien experience with like a hint of the memory of Aredhel's Nan Elmoth experience, I think is awesome. Like, I love that idea because, no, that's not Galadriel, but I still have long thought and still say that when Aragorn says that there is upon Galadriel and upon this land no stain, he's rather over egging the pudding at that point. Like, that is not true at all. It's not, Boromir's not right, in what he says, but Aragorn is overdoing it in what he says in response, I think. Anyway, so like, but I I like it. Again, it's not like, we don't go too far with the parallel. We're not trying to, taint Galadriel too heavily. But that recollection, I think, is an apt recollection. Like, even if she's not going to go in that direction, right? And it's not going to work out anything like that. But just a recollection that, like, it could be, right? This is one, option that's open. Galadriel could go in that direction, right? She didn't go in that direction. She's not gonna go in that direction, but it's there. It's out there, right? As a parallel and as a possibility. And I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so tell me more then about the climactic scene, about the confrontation between Aredhel and Eöl. How do you see, putting your director hats on now, how do you see the two of them acting in this? In particular, like Eöl, defensive, condescending? How do we see him trying to, or is he conciliatory? Right? Is he charming? Trying to pass it off, or is how and her, how is she very indignant? Is she shocked? Is she puzzled? How do you see the two of them acting?
Well, I don't think that she's that surprised.
Okay.
Because she's been getting kind of this weird possessive vibe over him, off of him for a little while now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ever since the birth of their son, and they haven't gone anywhere since then. Which this wasn't the plan. None of the things that are happening are the plan, right? Mm-hmm. And when she confronts him, I don't think that he really feels the need to be conciliatory. I did what I did. Right? Like, I'm not gonna apologize for that. Fine. You care so much about these people, fine. I'll let them go. Whatever. They don't mean anything to me. But because he has her exactly where he wants her. What is she gonna do? Right? And he can, when she challenges him in the idea that, well, or would you prevent me from leaving? He can actually say, no, but you'll never see your son again.
Right.
Because if you leave this forest outside of, without my permission, you're not coming back.
Right. Now, he wouldn't actually want her to go. He's possessive of her too, but he knows that he's got her. Right, and that's what he's emphasizing. Yeah,
right. It's a bluff.
Right.
It's a bluff, but a solid one because, like you say, she's not going anywhere. Right. Not without Maeglin.
Right. Not without my son, as he continues to call him. Right. Right.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, I thought you were making a Sally Fields reference there. I'm sad.
No. Just quoting the text. Okay. How does she act? So you were saying that she's not shocked. Like, this is not a moment where, like, her innocence is dashed, right? This is a moment of, like, where her suspicions are confirmed.
I would say that because she's gonna, like, you could do like a minor flashback to when she herself was on the receiving end of that,
right?
And so in some way that realization might be a surprise, right? But that she's shocked that he is kind of entrapping to the death anybody who shows up on his doorstep unasked. Yeah, the dwarves did kind of tell her that happened. Right. And it quite nearly happened to her. So it's not like it certainly doesn't blow her mind. Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why he wouldn't need to be conciliatory, because he's definitely they were trespassing, so they got what they deserved.
He wouldn't think there's anything wrong with what he would be surprised if she found something wrong about it, right?
Right. So I don't think he would even be defensive necessarily so much as just very matter of fact of, I did exactly what you're supposed to do in this situation.
Right. Yeah.
And so she's the one who's out of line by making a big deal of something that is nothing and all of it. Like he would definitely put it back on her that she's the one making problems.
What does she know about humans?
Oh,
How
good
sheltered is
question.
she? Is my question. Like, is this gonna be the first time she's ever seen humans? Is she gonna even know that they've
Has to be.
existed?
She has to know they exist because she was out traveling around
Oh yeah, that's
That's
right.
a
I
lot.
forgot about that.
after the people arrived there.
Okay. It was after the
So-
Estelators were already, herding. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So presumably she at least saw them, but wouldn't necessarily have had any direct interactions herself.
Okay. Okay.
And to say that she saw them is like, I don't necessarily think that needs to have happened, because
Right.
you could easily pass through that area without seeing anybody for miles, even if there were batches of people wandering around on the plains.
Right. We only see her interaction with that caravan of dwarves
Right, with
Yeah.
the dwarves.
who
Right.
do talk about having traded with people,
Yes,
including
With the
humans.
humans.
So, like,
Right.
they've been mentioned in her company, but yeah,
Okay.
it's possible she's maybe never seen one before.
Okay. Okay. Now I'm just trying to figure out how, and how it fits in with her shelteredness. Yeah, I like. Brian is suggesting the line from their confrontation: "I am master of Nan Elmoth." Right. Like, just again, this sort of nonchalant, like, this is what I do. This is like what is the issue here. Yeah, and it's good to see you back, Brian. I haven't seen you around these parts in forever. It's great having you around here on this episode. Okay. So her final, where we leave her in episode 7, is with this realization: A, that she now has any illusions, all illusions, most illusions that she had about him have now been exploded, right? But she realizes she can't leave, right? So that means when we come back to her in episode 8, there's going to be now a more kind of settled enmity between the two of them, basically. Like, she's going to know that Eöl is her opponent, right? Is her enemy.
Yes.
Cannot be trusted. And that she is fighting with him, for the heart and soul of their child, basically, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's her definite goal throughout
Right.
episode 8 is to try to win Maeglin to her side.
Right. So when we get then to episode 8, we're now having her with a significantly older but still juvenile Maeglin, right? So he's looking like a 12-year-old-ish, 12, 13-year-old, right? So he's still
Preteen.
clearly
Preteen.
right, preteen. Okay, so he's still well short of adulthood, clearly, but also not an elementary school kid either, right? He's in the middle. Okay.
Maeglin is in middle school.
Maeglin is in middle school. That's a horrifying image right there. Okay. Right. Maeglin, the middle schooler. Now the story, her telling him the stories of Nevrest and Gondor, and I love the pop-up book, by the way. That seems exactly like what a Noldor mom would be doing, right? Making these gorgeous, intricate.
I'm so glad you like it, because it was something that kind of seemed a little absurd when we first imagined it. Because when you first imagine this elf princess making a pop-up book for her child and then showing it on screen in a show made for adults, it seems a little absurd, right? Until you think about, how does a Noldo make a pop-up book? It's the most magnificent.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Possibly make, right?
Yeah.
Because he's 50 years old. She's spent 50 years making this pop-up
book.
25.
25 years. Yeah, exactly. Still, yeah. I mean, it's decades she's been and I love the way. What I like about it most is what it. I mean, first of all, it reminds us of several things, right? It reminds us that she's an Oldo, right? You know, this is what they do, right? They're, you know, no piece of artwork is too intricate or elaborate, you know, for them. But also it shows, it's a really interesting glimpse, I think, of her last 25 years, right? Of her being alone with very little else to do. So we see, but of course, this book itself is associated closely with two things, right? With her son, right? And we can see the care that she has given to her son, even like to introduce him to art in this way, right? Because clearly, stylistically, it's going to be very different from everything else surrounding them, right? It's going to be very different from all of Eöl's work and Eöl's things. And so even just in kind of exposing him to the particular kind of intricate beauty of Noldor craftsmanship, even that is itself a kind of point of contact, deliberate point of contact for her son with her culture, right? As opposed to to his father's culture. But of course, it's also, the book is also dedicated to the, you know, her people, right? And the places that she remembers and you know, and designed to inspire love for and desire for these things in her son as well, to share her heritage and their people with her son. So I think it's really neat. I mean, I agree, Nick, with a pop-up book, it is conceivable, right? We would have to be careful in how it's presented so that it didn't look comical, right? Because it could look comical, right? It could look comical in the same way that, like, you know, she like brings in a snack and it's like a 7-layer wedding cake or something like that. You know, like, you know, I just whipped this up in the kitchen and you pull that out and that's funny, right? That would get a laugh. It's conceivable. I could imagine a similar kind of reaction, right? Like this, like, you know, ridiculously over elaborate thing that she brings. Let me read you a story, whomp, right? And then this, you know, huge, incredibly intricate thing comes. But again, I don't think it need be like that. I don't think that need be the reaction if we handle it properly. And I like even the fact that Eöl calls it out, right? That he critiques it as being babyish. And Maeglin's interest in his mother's stories as you know, an overly childish interest of his, so that it kind of makes it explicit. You know, this is clearly a thing that she made for him, began making for him, certainly when he was a much younger child, right, a long time ago, and still is used by the two of them as, you know, the premise for stories, now more deeper and more serious stories about them than she used to tell before. On the subject of which, I was interested in sort of showing that Marie, in the script, you had her referring, when she was talking about Vinyamar, you had her speaking specifically of the Merith Atherthad, right? Which was a really cool opportunity to have him ask innocently if Dad came, right, to the Merith Atherthad, right? You know, was Father involved in the Feast of Reuniting? Not so much, actually. Yeah, no, kind of boycotted that one. He did. So that's kind of fun by itself. But I was just kind of thinking, like, thematically, I was interested in your choice to kind of dwell on Nevrast, Vinyamar, and the Merith Atherthad instead of lingering on Gondolin in that moment, which, because there's not a whole lot of script time, right, in that moment for storytelling. And obviously it's Maeglin who's later on going to be bringing up, you know, like, you know, Mom's the daughter of the High King, right? You know, he's gonna be bringing in the stories, you know, and you know, relating things from her stories. But what were you thinking about when you put the focus on Vinyamar and the Merith Atherthad there?
I wanted to show how nostalgic she is and how she really misses her family and her friends and everything. And she had complicated feelings about Gondolin, and that's why she left. She didn't necessarily have those complicated feelings about Nevrest. That was just a place that, Vinyamar, sorry. That was just a place that she loved. So I thought that would be an uncomplicated little vignette. I was hoping that I wasn't glossing over Gondolin too much at the end of the scene. The scene does build up to Gondolin, at least.
Right.
But it's true that I didn't necessarily include a similar vignette about, remember this time in Gondolin, let me tell you about it.
Right.
So that was, it was mostly because Vinyamar is now deserted and empty. So it only lives in memories. And I just kind of wanted to show that nostalgia and that loss. Whereas Gondolin's a real city that you could go to if you
if you knew how to get there, right?
If you could find it, yeah.
And I kind of like that we kind of build to Gondolin, but then we're disappointed, right? In a way, like there's no catharsis in the story of Gondolin, although that's clearly where we're headed.
And also that's the moment when Eöl interrupts the conversation. Like he breaks into the description of and concept of going to Gondolin and drags Maeglin away at that
Perhaps he was watching them on Nanny Pond.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he had his two-way pond on there. Has his little monitor going all the time. Yeah.
I also
there's a reason why I don't check in on even though I can check in on the baby monitor with which we have a video baby monitor in our daughter's room. I don't check in on that during the day because that kind of feels like I'm spying on my wife in a weird way.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Or the people that you've ensorcelled.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know what you're talking about, Dave.
Right. That's a different video feed anyway, but yeah.
Blocking Dave on Twitter.
But I'm sorry, Marie, you were gonna talk about the conversation and where they were headed?
No, I was just gonna say that another thing I left out of the scene is the silent servants.
Yes.
So there's room for other things here, and the question is where to put the emphasis. So I wanted to at least mention Gondolin, and having the story interrupted seemed okay. But if we needed silent servants to be standing there listening to this whole thing as Eöl spies, that could be incorporated without any effort at all. There's definitely room for.
I like that, actually. If the silent servants all have liveries that look kind of like how Eöl, not exactly like, but kind of like how Eöl himself dresses, right? And if during the touching story time scene between Maeglin and we occasionally show that standing along the wall are these, servants who are dressed in Eöl's livery watching, that kind of sense of his creepy, presence watching over them and making sure that I kind of like that effect a lot, that his surrogate's there in the room all the time. Even to have that not shown for the whole first half of their conversation, and then we kind of pan out and realize that the creepy footmen have been lurking over, looming over her the entire time, is, I think, pretty cool. And also kind of begins to show, the other thing that I like about that is that kind of a reveal recontextualizes the story. It doesn't change it necessarily, but it adds a new layer onto it, right? At first, it's about her connection with her son, and it's about her, what she's trying to teach him and how she's, what she's trying to show him and share with him. But then in the context of Eöl's watchers, right, it becomes more of an act of rebellion, right? To be doing, to be talking about Gondolin and talking about the Noldor and praising the Noldor, under the noses, of his, in defiance of, Eöl's disapproval by proxy, right, in the silent footman around the room. And I like that dimension. I think that's pretty cool. So when Eöl takes Maeglin away, right, this is the first time he literally takes him completely away, leaving Aredhel by herself, right? And I think it is well done to show how excited Maeglin is about this, right? To have him, you can really see that the tug of war thing, right? The drawing him away from his happy story time, talking and thinking about the Noldor with his mom, to now being brought into these more grown up things in Eöl's life. What's Eöl's plan, by the way? We never really know this. Like, the text never says, right? What's Eöl's long-term plan? Like, possessiveness, sure, but what does he envision in his relationship with Maeglin, do you think?
He's planning to shape his son into a little mini-me, so that he'll have a perfect little minion who does what he wants and agrees with him on everything and will just be around. So not really an ideal measure of fatherhood,
Right.
but the most extremely possessive version of love for a child.
Right. Yeah, and even that, of course, is like, why? Because, I mean, as we've talked about before, right? I mean, that there's no, like, I shall raise you up and you shall take over my little evil empire when I'm gone, right? That's not a thing, right, among the elves. He doesn't need an heir. He doesn't need, but he's also presumably not expanding either, right? That, like, with the help of my, junior assistant, whom I've brainwashed into identical views to myself, I shall now be able to rule twice as large a creepy forest as I did before. Like, that's not it either, right?
No, I mean, obviously part of it is just to hurt her, though.
Right.
He's using their son to get to her because
Right.
he knows that she loves the son but doesn't love him anymore, presumably, or at least doesn't truly want to be with him anymore.
Right. Right.
Her feelings may be complicated,
But also, she's like, he's got his, like, creepy silent servants, right? And who do exactly what he wants without question. And this is like that, but better, because he does it of his own free will.
Right.
It's like a twisted version of Aule, I think.
Right. Instead of learners whom he could teach, he has, like, this is like the ultimate sort of affirmation of himself, essentially. Yes. Right.
Yeah. And the ultimate affirmation of his own awesomeness, because here is this awesome person that he has himself personally created, in almost every facet, who looks up to him and thinks he's even more awesome.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see Eöl's thinking not really going beyond that.
It's like looking into an awesome, but not as awesome as you mirror.
Right. Who looks at you with exactly the view of adoration and respect that you think everyone should have. Right. Yeah.
The appropriate amount. Yeah, exactly.
Of course. Exactly. The only one who has who shows you the appropriate amount. Yeah. No, exactly. Okay. All right. That makes sense.
That's kind of how Eöl works, right? Like, his brand of, like, sort of evil isn't the take over the world kind. It's more focused on, like, sort of dominating the people in front of him.
Right. It's just turned almost entirely inward. I mean, it's just, he's there in his, like, sort of evil, but ultimately simply narcissistic little island, right, in the middle of Beleriand. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it too much, but yeah, I mean, he doesn't have any plans for conquest. He doesn't have any, he's just like doing his own thing and establishing his own little realm, and he doesn't care what goes on outside because it's all about him. He's at the center.
And it's not like he's even like, it's not like he's going out of his way to torture his wife and son or anything. Like he's not completely a sadist. It's really just that he just is trying to exercise a level of control that he shouldn't be.
Right, as is appropriate because he is the master, right? I mean, this is even the use of his refusal to give Maeglin a name, right? And just call him my son. That's one of my favorite details, by the way. But I feel like Tolkien tells us more about Eöl's character in that detail than in almost anything else that we get from him, right? Because like, what else is there to him? Right? He is not a separate person. He's not his own. He is my son. Like that is his identity. Like what other identity does he need? That's super revealing, I think. Yeah.
He's like he's an evil Tom Bombadil character.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's actually, yes, I agree. Okay, so tell me about, there was a great deal of emphasis with the visiting to the dwarves. There were kind of two things that were primarily emphasized, two themes that got primarily emphasized in the visit to Nogrod. Well, three. One was just the splendor of the dwarf works, right? Which is, I think, interesting and important in some ways for Maeglin, especially like Mr. Future Captain of Miners here, right? Is this is an important learning moment for Maeglin, right? But in addition, he does get shown around the mines, doesn't he? Does it get shown to the mines, or?
I didn't specifically call out mines, but I mean, he can. The tour is supposed to include the wonders of Nogrod. So
right.
The mines can get the tour.
I'm just kind of thinking like I just planting the seed for a few seasons down the road. Maeglin being like, "Tell me more about your mines" or something like the, that's or him reporting back afterwards to be like, "Their mines are so cool," like what Anyway, yeah, I'm just mining. It's going to be his thing. But anyway, two other themes, right? Mortality, and kingship, and his father's exclusion from that leadership. That conversation at the end where he learns that his father is not as influential as he thinks his father is, right? Those are both really interesting moments. So tell me why mortality? What is the feature of the mortality sub-theme here, the mortality among the dwarves?
The dwarves have been keeping that a secret from the elves for some time. Back in season 3, Norn made the call to not tell the Sindar of Doriath about dwarven mortality, and they've kind of kept with that. So the fact that Eöl is well aware and would even be told news of a death and invited to a funeral is to show that he has a long history with these dwarves, and they don't have secrets from him the way they have secrets from the other elves.
Right. I did like that element of it, the kind of, he's an insider, right? Even his, because he says that the dwarves are really secretive and they don't like telling the elves about this, right? The fact that he's able to share that is, I think, a really fun effect there. Okay.
And then the other element is the friendship between mortal beings and immortal beings is kind of the whole issue with the story in Nargothrond this episode. So that is one aspect of the friendship of Eöl and the dwarves that can parallel what's going on with Andreth and Finrod. So why not draw that to everyone's attention now? Like, why now? And that's kind of why now.
Right. The other thing, of course, that especially since we're talking about kingly mortality, is it raises the issue of heirs, right? Yeah, Turgon, and that he has no heirs is an issue, right, with Maeglin. And so kind of planting the seed of kings do die. And by the way, one of my favorite lines was when Eöl says that the new king will rule for 2 centuries, and Maeglin is like, so soon, like that's it. That I like that. I thought that was fun. And he's shocked at how short the lifespan is.
Himself. I know he
Right.
hasn't lived 2 centuries yet, but
Yeah.
it seemed the other's perspective.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, he would. 25 years is plenty of time to be acculturated into, the expectation of centuries. I mean, even just the fact that, kids have a sense of, how long they're gonna be kids for. They know how many years, or they know this, right? They know what it's when the threshold comes. They're sort of, so he's gonna know. He's 50 years. He said a century or 2 is how long the dwarf is going to live, and he's he knows 50 years is only then going to be he's not even going to be a grown up until then. So yeah, he's going to be well aware of the different scale of time. But I thought that was fun. Okay. So tell me more about the Eöl not getting, not being as important as Maeglin thinks. This is going to be the moment, really the first moment, where we have Maeglin's eyes being opened, right? Maeglin's illusions being shattered, obviously slower than his mom, because he was only a baby when hers were. But it's about his realization that his dad isn't as awesome as he thought he was.
Right. So basically, it's literally undercutting the very goal that Eöl has in mind, right? And we're showing that what Aredhel thought was going to happen here was never going to happen, because while Eöl has a relationship with the dwarves, he was never that important to them. And they've always thought he was kind of weird, right? And they'd much rather be allies. They'd much rather be allies and trading partners with the Noldor than with Eöl.
Right. Okay. Where do we see Maeglin making his choice? Did he do that explicitly?
Not in this episode.
Okay.
At the end of the episode, he comes home and his mom and dad snipe at each other, and then it's Aredhel and Maeglin and alone together. And he says, "Okay, tell me more about Gondolin."
Right.
And the fact that she's asking about his trip, like, how was Nogrod? So if he wanted to just effusively say how amazing Nogrod was and never mention Gondolin again, like, that would have been one thing. But he definitely doesn't do that. So it's not explicit, but he's realized that his father is not the hotshot that he says he is. But his mom really is the daughter of the High King of the Noldor, and really is the sister of the King of Gondolin. And oh hey, there's an opportunity here.
Right.
No one can go to Gondolin because it's a secret. So tell me about your time in Gondolin. Like, he knows she knows how to get there.
Right. Yeah, nobody else could go to Gondolin. And even that, like the... And I love the way that it sets up, like how the journey with his dad to the secret halls of the dwarves sets up that parallel, right? Journey with parent to secret city in the mountains, right? So we can see but yet in that it's a disillusioning trip in that way, right? That in the end, his father can't take him as far, in a sense, right, as his mom is able to.
And he's also not making this choice out of love for one parent over the other, or because he likes one of them better. it's a very calculated choice on his part, and I think that shows a little bit of how cold Maeglin is.
Right.
Like, he's just a little kid here, but there are some warning signs that he is not a normal little kid.
Right.
There's some weird stuff going on with him.
That's the last thing I was going to ask about this. How creepy is Maeglin in this episode? Like, on the creep scale, he's relatively low because he's precocious, right? I mean, he should be precocious.
Yes. He doesn't act like a little kid. You know, it's interesting. I've talked about being homeschooled before, but I met a family quite recently, and we were sitting down at dinner with them, and their daughter, who was probably about, I want to say like 9 or 10, was talking to us like, not like a kid talks to you, but like they're talking to an equal.
Right.
And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, they homeschool their kids.
Right.
And I was like,
That's very common.
And when that was revealed, I was like, I knew you were homeschooled. You know how I knew? Because you talk to adults like you're a normal person.
Right. Socialized by adults rather than by kids your own age. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the feel that he should give off. You know, not the stereotypical, like, awkward, unable to be cool, homeschooled kid, but the homeschooled kid who talks to adults like that's a normal thing to do.
Right. Because it's what they normally do. Yeah. And this would be like, this kind of thing would be revealed in his conversation with his parents, but primarily I would think in his conversation with the dwarves. Like, they would, the disjunction between their expectations of him and his actual performance would make that most clear, right?
Yeah.
Well, and there's so much going on with that. The cultural differences, the perception of his age among the dwarves versus his actual age. He looks like a teenager, but when do dwarves look like teenagers? I don't know. And he's probably taller than all the dwarves. So do they treat him as an adult because he looks grown to them? Like, there's this boundaries that are very fluid there. So I'm not sure if I necessarily brought him across as quite as precocious as he could be. Like, there probably are some tweaks that could make that come out a little bit more. But there's several layers of what's going on in his interaction with one dwarf. He interacts with one dwarf.
Right. Perhaps some particularly savvy questions about mining. No, sorry, I'm not obsessed. It's all about the long game. Some film, it's all about the long game, right?
I will admit that I wanted to show some differences between Nogrod and Belagast here. And we've established in the past that Belagast is the dwarf city where the weapons and the armor are made, and the craftsmen and the tradesmen and the caravans are all from Belagast. And then Nogrod has been a little bit more removed from Beleriand, and they're the jewelers and the artisans and the fancy artwork of the dwarves. So it's kind of the practical versus the artistic sides division.
Yes.
So I had to put a line in the script about how the engineers are from Belagast and the architects are from Nogrod. I couldn't avoid that. Right.
No, makes perfect sense. Okay, good. Well, let's I do have aspirations to talk about at least one other part of episode 8 before we're done. So let's move on to the next bit of episode 8. So, To the Horizon is the title of the episode, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So it's been a 15-year gap since the Council of Estulad. So we've got the House of Bëor is now up north and firmly established, right? So we're skipping over the awkward journey and establishment of new place up there in Dorloman. Okay, so we have the Aredhel plot that we've been talking about. The Aredhel and Eöl plot that we've been talking about is the B plot. The people of Bëor are the centerpiece, right? That's the A story. Andreth and her solution for this, and her unexpected field trip, unexpected to me anyway, field trip that she takes. And then, of course, the C plot also connected to the A plot, Brigalos. her brother. Yeah, I like it. By the way, I loved the bonfire. I thought that was a really great, because we had been talking and joking before about surly Baorian teenagers and their unrest and misbehavior, right, in Nargothrond. But at the time, we had only some like fairly flippant, unrealistic but comical suggestions about how to bring that about. I loved the bonfire idea. I thought that was a really brilliant way to. It was perfect. It's perfect because it's a legitimate. I mean, like, boy, how do you rub the elves of Nargothrond the wrong way, right? Is betraying the secrecy of their halls, in a way that's plainly visible for miles and miles around. So this is not only like disrespectful, but like genuinely reckless, right, and dangerous even. Because there are very few other things that they could do that would actually compromise the elves, their hosts, and yet also is a perfectly natural, without having to escalate things too far, is a perfectly natural sort of rebellious expression, and even something, that an unruly group of teenagers could convince themselves is not a big deal, and like people are making too much of a big deal out of it, right? So I loved that. I thought that was a really great, and then the elves being both puzzled and irritated, and more than irritated, but also, again, like it's not like harm was done to somebody, right? It's not like they're destroying things or,
but the elves do know that Morgoth has airborne spies.
Right.
Like they know the vampires exist.
Right.
And they're not eagles, but that's not an excuse to go around lighting fires. And of course, the other benefit is that we got to do more 80s action movie stuff, which is always fun. And apparently only can be done when there's men around.
Right. Right. Yeah, I have to admit that I was picturing the opening scene of Jaws when you were describing the bonfire. Yes.
The scene on the beach in Karate Kid.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, yes. Yeah.
Something that led to this. Yeah.
Absolutely. 2 bonfires on beaches with different results. Yes. Exactly. But no, it was perfect. But again, I put into this context, it's really seriously a big deal. Like that's not just so it was a great way to put them really genuinely in the wrong, and yet nevertheless without depicting them as unsympathetic and merely irritating. Right. So I thought it was a fantastic vehicle. Yeah. And you can see they don't mean any harm, right? They're not like, they don't look like bad kids. Bregolas doesn't look like a bad kid. But yeah, no, I did like that. I did like that a lot. But let's talk about Andreth. So I thought the conversations with Finrod went pretty well. I thought that my favorite little touch was him forgetting that, like, this is the second time we've had this bonfire problem. Why does this keep happening? And Aredhel having to remind him that it was more than a decade ago that the last time that this happened, right? These kids were barely even born the last time that this happened, and so it's not a recurring problem in the way that he thinks, but it is a recurring problem and points to a big issue, right? And even the very fact that he's oblivious to the fact that this involves an entirely new generation of teenagers who are doing the same thing shows really kind of points to the problem, and I think that's pretty cool. tell me more about the visit to the Haladin, about why, I mean, apart from the obvious, like more Haleth, which is worth any amount of digression, especially since it was I did not expect that we would get an opportunity to see this Haleth, right? To see the established Haleth, I am totally comfortable with my leadership and no one questions me. I'm not, a young girl learning to lead in crisis and developing, the strength of my will and my rapport with my people, but I am the unquestioned queen of this domain. We are well established in ourselves, and here is the life that we have made for ourselves. That was, again, all of that worth the price of admission on howsoever feeble an excuse. But thinking from Andreth's perspective, what were the primary reasons why you wanted to take her on this trip?
So the issue with trying to come up with a new revolutionary idea when you grew up in a situation is that you usually can't think outside the box of what reality is for you. So Aredhel can see that there's been a change over her lifetime and can see that the people live differently now than they did when they first came to Nargothrond and how this has all impacted them. But Andreth grew up there. She's only ever known this.
Right.
So typically reformers are people who came from the outside and came in and see what's wrong and fix it. To grow up within it and then become a reformer is a little more rare.
Right.
So we needed to take Andreth out of Nargothrond so she could see something else and then bring the ideas home.
There's a few things. Like, what Andreth winds up doing is going to make her people's lives more difficult. And we had to bring her into that with her eyes wide open. Otherwise, she looks kind of dumb, right? Like, if they get to Ladros and they realize, ooh, this is hard.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you, when I was reading Marie's script, as has been happening to me a shocking amount over the past season, I found myself getting really emotional thinking about how hard life has been for humans for millennia and how much easier I have it. It's absurd. It's absurd how easy we have it in comparison to all of history. It's ridiculous. So
there's a little bit of the city mouse visits the country mouse visits the city mouse going on here. Where Andreth is a fish out of water among Haleth's people because she's never had to live this way before.
Right. I think my favorite non-Haleth moment in this whole segment was the grain grinding scene. I thought that worked so well, Maria. I love the way that was balanced, right? On the one hand, we see her cluelessness, right? She's clumsy and soft-handed and doesn't know how to do any of these things, right? At the same time, we see her technological advancement as she's trying to explain how they grind grain in Nargothrond. And so just like the fact that she has this academic understanding of the grinding process, but can't do it with her own hands, right? Her physical clumsiness with it, and yet also I loved the singing at the end, right? That we can, because there were so many ways in which that scene could have gone badly, right? Like, that is, Andreth could have ended up looking really bad. Like, she could have sounded like a snob or something, and she didn't sound like a snob. She could have looked like a hopeless incompetent, and she didn't look like a hopeless incompetent. The people of, the Haladin women that she's grinding with could have ended up looking like savages, whom we were making fun of, like we're laughing at because they're so primitive compared to, even if Andreth, it doesn't come across as superior and condescending, the viewers could have felt superior and condescending looking at them. But I love it's the same kind of balance you were doing with the illiteracy thing, right? Like it's just different. Right. And like she begins to see and we begin to see through that, like Yeah, it's true. They do not have the technological advancement. Like their tools are cruder. There's a lot that they don't know than that they haven't learned. The people of Bëor have learned these things from the elves and know more than the people of Haleth. And yet their ways are good ways, actually. Like even though they're not as sophisticated in many ways. And I thought that balance of, because we do kind of need to see both sides of that, right? We need to see both what the House of Bëor has legitimately gained from being with the elves. They've not been neglected, right? They're not, and yet they're not just the superior society coming and, visiting the peasants either. So I like that.
Speaking of the technological difference, there was one very small detail that Marie did in the script that I thought was really fascinating, and that's Larnell's reaction when Andreth tries to explain the milling process for the House of Bëor. She has this kind of puzzled look and kind of moves on from it because like that none of that made any sense to her.
Didn't make any sense, yeah.
And the thing that I found really interesting about that detail is that kind of reaction is something that you would only know about if you had had a conversation like that before, if you had traveled to another culture and had to explain how things are done in your probably more technologically advanced culture, and you get that same reaction. And I know that Marie has had those conversations before, and you can tell because of that detail.
Yeah. No, I thought that was really well done. But again, like with neither side being like dismissed, right?
Like the woman isn't awed by this,
right?
But she doesn't like kind of. It doesn't really break her stride either. She thinks about it for a minute. It doesn't make any sense, and she is whatever. Then goes back to what her life is, and that's the way that people actually react under those circumstances in cases that I've seen anyway.
Right. Yeah, and again, like even though she's talking about the technologically superior grinding processes that they have in Nargothrond, it doesn't get all like Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court either. Like she's not coming among the Haladin and bringing the blessings of superior technology with her. She brings them tools that they don't have, or things that are unlike things that they probably superior to what they have, but those are just gifts, right? It's not she doesn't change,
she's not uplifting them.
No, exactly. It does not have that effect. She's just learning from them and benefiting from herself from the time among them, and her conclusions when she leaves is that she has gained an appreciation of things that there are ways in which she knows that they need to emulate them, the Haladin, and that I think that's really cool. Again, and in a lot of ways, kind of almost counterintuitive, right? One of the things that I thought was really interesting, and I'm not sure. I think that this parallel could be kind of explored a little bit more, though I'm not quite sure how to do it. But I couldn't help but think of two scenes in parallel. One, the Andreth grinding scene that we were talking about, and the other, the Bregalas and the horse guy scene, right? Yeah, the manure shoveling scene. But most importantly, his interaction with the stable guy, right, who's like, taking care of horses is like his profession, and he likes horses and he's comfortable and he's happy there. It was an interesting contrast, right? Because Bregalas's conclusion from this is kind of, horror might be a little bit overstating it, but anyway, I mean, he's kind of appalled by that. I mean, it kind of opens his eyes. And I loved what you did with that, the way that Bregalas goes from seeing we're being submitted to drudgery as a punishment, and yet the really horrifying thing is that the thing that's being afflicted on us as a punishment is like the normal daily life of our, of the older generation. The really bad thing is that I might end up like that horse guy who's shoveling manure and liking it full time. Right, that like that's all that there is. But again, do you see what I mean about the parallel there? Like that was, Andreth is encountering. Bregolas is not really having his perspective broadened by shoveling manure, right? He does not have that same kind of, doesn't draw the same kinds of conclusions.
Right. The purpose of the scene with the grinding of grain is not that manual labor is wonderful and should be glorified.
Right.
It's that what the people of Haleth have is a community, and that they work together at tasks that are necessary for their survival. And yes, it's difficult work, and yes, it's backbreaking and painful, and nobody actually wants to do this stuff. But you have to, and so they do it together, and they sing their work song, and they make it happen. So it has meaning. The shoveling of the stables, yeah, it's work that has to be done. But this guy does it as a solitary task. He has like zero interaction with Bregolas throughout this whole thing. He's not teaching him about horses. He's not bringing him into a group of people who all care for the horses and hang out together and make it their like little thing. It's a solitary task. He does it on his own. It's very repetitive.
Once and he doesn't get to enjoy the fruits of it.
Right. He doesn't ride the horses.
He doesn't ride the horses. Right. I like that. That was a really interesting touch. He ends up, the guy, the horse dude, right, ends up being the sort of spokesperson for those who don't want to go. Right. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't quite sure kind of how to take that, or how I was meant to take that as like, is this like those of the House of Bëor who have just like, is he a representative of like the harm that has been done to the House of Bëor essentially?
He's institutionalized, certainly.
Right.
Like Eowyn says, use in old age has accepted his limits.
Right.
And I agree that it could feel a little bit muddy. I think the fact that Aredhel herself doesn't go kind of helps soften that a little bit. Because, like, let's be realistic here. The older people who go, like, they're not going to be okay. Right. Like, they're going to go to a much harder life. Nobody knows what they're doing, right? They can't teach anybody these skills because they don't have them. Right. So, like, they're almost dead weight in that circumstance in a way that older people generally aren't. In a culture, in a sustenance culture, older people have a job to do,
even if they important can't, roles. Yes,
right. They don't have, even if they don't have physical tasks that they're doing, they still have an immensely important role, and that's a role that they can't play because they've been institutionalized. Right.
It also is a really interesting glimpse into what looks like almost like a lost generation, right? I mean, it's like they are like the casualties. They're the living examples of like the unintended bad consequence of Finrod's choice and Beor's choice, right? Yeah, they are lost potential. Like they're not going to go on to accomplish anything. That guy's going to stay mucking stables on his own, for the rest of his short life. And again, no harm was intended, right? No evil has been done, and yet there's a whole generation of people who are not going to like accomplish anything in a sense.
Right. The old man in the stables is content with his life, but the viewer is not invited to feel that same way about it. Right.
In the same way that we are invited into the peace and contentment of the Haladin when we get there. Now, the other thing that was really interesting, the other scene that was really interesting to me, and of course I loved the conversations with Haleth, but neither of those stood out to me quite like the grain scene and the hunting scene. Aredhel's frozen moment when she cluelessly freezes and doesn't know what to do in the middle of the hunt and is almost killed, is really interesting. And this, one of the things that this sort of shows is like her own recognition. I mean, it's interesting that she has this experience, right, which one could easily imagine a conclusion that could be drawn from that is, we are not cut out for this, right? Like, I am a representative of a soft and clueless people who could never do that, right? But that's not her conclusion, right? I mean, she does this, and then in fact she turns around and she's like, yeah, no, this is just what we need. So tell me more about how sort of how that operates, that in the feast scene afterwards, and sort of what was being what you were sort of showing through all of those things.
The hunter who is with Andreth, who has the dogs and actually kills the aurochs, is a young hunter. So this is someone younger than Andreth. And yet this person is successful in what he is doing. He's not just like an apprentice or hanging out on the sidelines. He's an active part of the group. And at the feast afterwards, he's celebrated for his contribution.
Right.
And looking back at her own culture, Andreth recognizes that people of her age are considered apprentices and people who stand on the sidelines and not people who do things. So she's recognizing that there's opportunities in a culture like this for a young person to contribute and be happy about what they're working on, and in a way that she just hasn't seen before.
Right. Yeah, I like that. And then we have the unexpected gift from Haleth, right? And it's the horns of that aurochs that almost killed her, or an aurochs like it anyway. Yeah. Why that gift? I was interested in that gift. Why that gift in particular? Anything? I mean, it's clearly. I mean, it clearly ties her, like, she is taking home with her the memory of that experience specifically, right? With the also, as you've talked about, the sort of the communal thing. I mean, the way that the drinking horn of the aurochs horn also recalls the sort of communal life of the Haladin there as well.
I wanted there to be a bookend gift-giving scene, and I wasn't really sure on the gifts. So I kind of threw it out on the boards and was like, what should these gifts be? And I did get some suggestions, and the consensus seemed to be that it should be something that represents each culture. So the advanced technology of the House of Bëor versus the warrior culture of the Haladin is kind of where I was showing that. But there were other suggestions too. So, I mean, it could have been a harp going one way or the other, or weapons going one way or the other. Presumably from the elves of Nargothrond would have weapons that the Haladin would like. But
So one thing that we could do is use the horn, right? But instead of it just being the horn from the aurochs, it's been made into an instrument, right? And the horn represents, to at least Western cultures, it's a call to action, right? And so that horn can be sounded when they're, and of course it's probably huge, right?
Right.
Like one of the closest living genetic relatives of the ancient aurochs is the longhorn cattle.
Yeah, aurochs are enormous. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we don't make cows that big anymore.
Yeah, well, the Nazis tried, apparently.
Did they?
In my research on aurochs, while I was thinking about this, I discovered that the Nazis apparently tried to bring back the aurochs, and basically all they made was really big, really angry cows, and not.
Well, that's close, actually, from all that I understand.
But they're not actually genetically close to aurochs. And they're just aggressive for no reason, right? It's not like a wild beast. They're just irrationally angry for no reason. And so, but anyway, but yeah, if Now, that same horn could be in Barahir's possession when he comes down out of the hills and rescues Finrod, because we had talked about like what that kind of looks and sounds like, and the idea of, because the elves fight in probably a pretty organized way, and I just imagine Barahir and his guys coming down out of the hills like banshees, and it actually terrifying the monstrous orcs on the other side. Right, the idea of the savagery of these human warriors coming down out of the hills, scaring the orcs, just that feels so good to me, right? And I thought about the sound of, like having them yelling and screaming as they're coming down the hills, but also blowing horns. I thought about the Carnix, which is a terrifying sounding horn from that was used by Celtic warriors in Europe. Now, of course, you can't really make one of those out of an actual horn, but we can just make it sound like that. Like we have the technology. It's fine.
That's fine. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, so you're thinking about the horn, using Haleth's horn as a kind of an. I mean, because we already were talking about the. Andreth is already kind of loaded down with artifacts, right? She's going to have the stole.
She's not carrying it,
No, but we're basically putting a third a third element in there, right?
But this isn't carried by the leader. This is carried by their mouthpiece, as you will, right? Somebody goes along that. Baron is blowing the horn probably when they come running down the hill.
Right. But it does enable us there to be a moment, right, when she gives it to somebody else, because I mean it's important. It's a gift, right? It was given to her. Of course, in older societies, regifting is super important, right? I mean, that's what you do with gifts in large part. At least I'm thinking here primarily of Beowulf, right? And you get, that's like the lineage of the gift that you give is this was this is a great gift because it was given to me on a great occasion, by somebody else who received it in turn from. Anyway, so that kind of lineage, right? For Andreth, it's not useful, right? She's not going to use a horn in that way. She's not going to be that kind of a figure, but she's taken it, right? And it's like one of the things that she has learned, and one of the fruits of her trip is going to be her leading the people out and beginning to change their culture and so her kind of handing it off does she hand it off to Bregolas, or is she going to hand it off straight to Barahir? That's what I was just thinking.
That is thinking that Bregolas has it as they're leaving, right?
Right.
As they're leaving the Nargothrond, he has it and he blows it as they're exiting.
As they're leaving, yeah.
Yeah. And then he can hand it off to Baron like right before like in the early stages of episode 12 during the Dagger Bragalak.
Right.
Note to self.
What happens to it? Is it going to be cloven when Baron finds the camp and his father dead, or is it going to be something that Baron takes with him?
I mean, it's probably huge. I don't imagine him like carrying it.
He can't carry. Yeah, it would be. We would find we would have a cloven horn moment, right?
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, we'll decide that in season 6, but this is not something that's going to make it to Numenor.
Yeah.
So it can get destroyed.
Right. It's got to be destroyed sooner or later.
I mean, Bregor's bow is supposed to make it all the way to Numenor, so something from this camp can survive. But if Baron walks away with one item from that camp, it's going to be Gregor's bow, not this random horn that we just invented.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Good. Okay. Well, it's getting very late. It's getting very late. Want to say a thing or two about Finrod and his reaction, Or should we save that for next time, do you think? There's not too much to say. I think it's really interesting, you know, that the way that he receives it. I like that he explicitly draws the parallel to the rebellion of the Noldor, right? You know, that moment where he's like, look at me, not perpetuating the same problem into the next generation, right? Is kind of fun, right? Is a really sort of self-aware moment on Finrod's part there. But yeah, but I also thought that the way that they explained it to him, you know, the way that I mean, one of the things that I really liked about their conversations with Finrod is that we can see, although the whole premise of their conversation is we as a people cannot thrive. We are being prevented from fulfilling our own destinies, our own calling. We've lost our way and our purpose as a people as a consequence of this. Nevertheless, we can see the fruit of their time in Nargothrond as well, right? They understand Finrod and the elves very well, right? And they are in a place to be able to explain to him in his terms. Like, they're able to say, we understand why you did this. Like, and we know where the mistake came from, right? That what seemed to, you know, this has seemed to you just like a time for us to rest and gather ourselves, you know, in preparation for the next move. And yet, look, generations have gone by and our people have changed. And that was the one thing, if there was one element missing from their discussion, it was change. A more overt reference to that primary theme, that's one of the things that he doesn't calculate, right? That like
we're not the same people who arrived here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Change has happened. Like the time, our time here has changed us in ways that you could not guess, right?
Yeah.
Because change does not affect you in the same way. And it's time for us to change, to continue changing, right? It's time for us to embrace change and to change more in this other newer way. So that was one thing that I think would be kind of cool to kind of link in, because we need to show Finrod continuing to kind of wrestle with the whole change concept, right? But again, I thought I really liked their understanding, Aredhel and Andreth's understanding, you know, his positive reception of it, but their comprehension of him, I thought was really, really telling. Because again, like they have gained in wisdom, like the people have been blessed by their time in Nargothrond, and they are in a position which is different even from the House of Hador. Right? These people know the elves better. They understand the elves better than any of the other people, even the House of Hador, right? They work with the elves, but they don't get them in the same way. They're still kind of living in parallel with the elves rather than really, you know, living among them in the same way, and certainly understanding them like we see with Aredhel and Andreth. So I really liked that. I thought that was cool.
Look at Andreth and Aredhel mansplaining to the elves. It's very
nice.
Literally.
Yeah, I liked it. Yes, they are mansplaining. Yes, exactly.
In an episode completely dominated by female characters.
Yes. Very true. Very true. And I hadn't even noticed that, actually. That was something that never really struck me at any point until you just mentioned it. Yes, it's almost entirely dominated by, except for Eöl, basically. Eöl becomes like Eöl and Maeglin become the, I mean, there are minor masculine figures like the horse guy and the young hunter
and
Bregalas, right? Who's the big, the other, but yeah, I mean, the core elements of the whole story are Aredhel, Andreth, and Haleth. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Very neat. Excellent. Good. Well, that's all we have time for here. We didn't talk about, but we kind of did talk about Bregalas. There's a little bit more we could say perhaps about the teenagers and stuff, but we kind of touched on it. But anyway, we're going to be, maybe we can come back and we'll probably talk about it a little bit more in the context of moving on as the House of Bëor begins to continue changing more as we move forward. and we get the love affair between Andreth and Aegnor. This has been one of those things that have been most curious to see how this would come about. One of the most unusual love stories in Tolkien's world, right? The unhappy elf-human romance, the only woman who has ever tried to marry up in all of Tolkien's corpus, right? And it doesn't go well. Guys marry up all the time, but they don't marry down. And
Don't they all, though, really?
that seems to be the premise. Anyway, we'll get to look at this next time, and that's going to be really, really interesting to see, because it's again, this is a love story unique in Tolkien's world, and I think that's a pretty exciting opportunity to discuss. So, and we get my Dracula scene that I've been waiting for. So that's also going to be very cool. All right. So that is what we'll be doing next time, which will be Thursday, June 3rd at 10 p.m. Eastern time. So thanks everybody for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you live in 2 weeks, or of course, if you're listening or watching this asynchronously after the fact, whenever it is that you get to it, maybe 5 minutes after now. But I will say, as always, one last thing I wanted to say before we go. You will have heard, of course, we've not been looking at the text of the script because it's quite long. But for those of you who haven't read it yet and are just sort of hearing our discussion of it, just wanted to invite you. You can find the scripts on the forums. It posted there online at forums.signumuniversity.org. Go to Film and then down into scripts and season 5, and you can find this script and our other outlines and things. So just wanted to make sure to draw people's attention to where they can find that, to read that for themselves if you'd like to read more of the script that we've just been discussing. So with that, I will say, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed.